Welcome to Murder in the Black. I'm Steph, and before we begin our 2 episodes for today, I want to take a moment to thank our incredible community. Your support, your messages, your reviews, your conversations fuel the stories we tell here. And today, I'm excited to announce the winners of our latest giveaway. Congratulations to our giveaway winners, Kamari Downs 3926, Tam Tam Z8I N5X, and Lisa Berry 8443. I will include today's winners in our show notes, and it also will be an announcement on our Instagram and Facebook pages. You have 2 weeks to respond. Simply send me a DM with your email information, and I will send over your gift cards as soon as possible. Thank you to everyone who entered. We love engaging with you, and there will be more chances to win in the new year, right at the top of season 9. Now, let's get into our true crime case for today. Some stories begin quietly, so quietly that you almost miss that moment everything changes. A curfew broken, a phone unanswered, a car that's simply not where it should be. None of these moments feel alarming on their own until they become the last known clues in a young man's life. In 2005, in the growing city of Charlotte, North Carolina, the Smith family waited for their son, Harmahn, to come home. They waited through the evening and into the night, unaware that the search that began in their quiet suburban community would lead detectives into an abandoned apartment, shifting stories and truth, both devastating and unexpected. Today, we'll walk through the journey from disappearance to discovery to justice while honoring the young man at the heart of it. Charlotte in 2005 was booming. New communities, new opportunities, neighborhoods expanding as families settled into safer, quieter suburbs. But the growth also shifted teen social networks in ways that weren't always predictable. The Smith family lived in one of those peaceful communities. Golfing neighborhood, low crime rate, neighbors who looked out for one another. But on January 28th, 2005, that sense of security shattered. 18-year-old Harmahn Smith didn't make his curfew. His father checked his room, the lights were off, but the silence grew heavy. Hours passed with no word. The family finally contacted the police. The lead detective on the case knew the Smith family personally, giving the investigation both a sense of urgency and emotional weight. Herman's family described him with deep affection. His mother nicknamed him Hunk of Love, which I think is incredibly cute. She raised him with integrity and compassion. Herman started working at 14 because he wanted to be self-sufficient. He loved clothes and he did not want his parents putting a cap on his wardrobe. He attended Brisbane Academy, and when he graduated, he did well. He planned to attend Winston-Salem State University. He was described as outgoing, respectful, and full of promise. And one of his prized possessions was his car. He owned a Nissan Maxima. And he always wore his Jesus face medallion. And Herman was not the type to disappear. He would always tell his family where he was going and his current whereabouts. And so when he missed curfew, this was a red flag. And investigators were able to track down his girlfriend, Julie Hill, because he was actually supposed to go and see her that night. And when they spoke to Julie, she mentioned that she spoke to him on the phone between 8 to 9 p.m., and he claimed that he was going to come and visit her after he ran some errands. Around 11 p.m., he still hadn't showed up, and she called him, and that was the last time she spoke with him. Now, she had no idea about his whereabouts or the errands that he was running. However, she suggested that they talk to his friend, Rashawn, a classmate of Herman's. Now, detectives made note of a problem that exists in missing person cases. They say that adults are very routine. They have a schedule, usually a work schedule, or their life revolves around their kids' schedule. So it's kind of easy to pinpoint when they are doing something and to backtrack the timeline. But for teens, that shifts a lot. Their plans are fluid. Friends may not always share full information when they're talking to friends that they've met up with, and peer groups can be secretive. Social connections may extend beyond what parents know, and this makes it difficult to build a timeline. And this is kind of what they were dealing with when they went and talked to Herman's friend Rashawn. Immediately when they approached Rashawn and inquired about Herman's whereabouts, Rashawn said, "Well, did Herman finally run away?" And this struck investigators to be odd because everything they knew about Herman's family, they hadn't heard any utterances of Herman wanting to leave or flee. But Rashawn claimed that Harmon had talked about going to South Carolina, but detectives instantly sensed this was inconsistent with what they already knew. And there was no evidence or behavior indicating that Herman had runaway tendencies. So they followed up and fully vetted what Rashawn said and just found out that that wasn't the truth. So they decided to check the hospitals, known locations, and they even put out a bolo for Herman's car. But days passed and they didn't have any leads. Now, I have a question. When you hear stories like this, do you think investigators should remain focused on the close circle first? Or should they widen their search immediately with teens because of what I just mentioned before? Teens' story and their routines seem to shift quite often. Detectives decide to pull Herman's bank activity and see if he had any recent transactions, but there was no activity. So they turned to his phone records, and there were two calls placed right after Herman's disappearance, and this caught their attention. They were able to trace the number back to a Nia Henderson, and they visited Nia at her home. Nia immediately denied knowing Herman, but she said she did have children. But she quickly shot down the theory that Herman could be one of her children's friends. She never heard the name. But she did mention that during the day that the calls came in to her residence, her nephew and his friend was visiting her home. The friend's name was KB, Kirk Brock, and detectives planned to speak with him, but something else surfaced first. That was Herman's car. It was found at Lawyers Ridge apartment complex. And upon initially looking at the car, there was no major damage. They did see that his rims were chipped on the left side. So they brought down his vehicle to have a full forensic sweep, looking for any foul play, blood, DNA. They needed to see if the car that was found could possibly give them any clues to where Herman was. And this was a critical lead. Detectives needed to get more information. They were still trying to track down KB. They now had the vehicle and it was being swept for forensics, but that would take time. So they did some good old detective work. They decided to canvass the apartment area. Investigators needed to talk to anybody who was on scene that had either seen Herman's vehicle before or had seen Herman. But there were no significant leads that came about from canvassing the area. However, when they talked to staff at the leasing complex, they learned that a couple had recently left, and they seemed to leave in a hurry because they hadn't paid their last month's rent. And according to the leasing agent, that couple was Latrice Williams and Danny Dinkins. They abruptly abandoned their apartment the same week Harmahn disappeared. And if you know about detectives, they don't believe in coincidences. They decided to go into the emptied unit. Inside, detectives found strange blood stains on the carpet. They brought in a forensics team, and it was determined that it was blood. They sent that blood off to the lab to determine what kind of blood was it. Was it animal blood? Was it human blood? But that also would take time. Then a tip came in that changed everything. A man named Jerry Moore contacted investigators claiming that Harmahn and Latrice had been involved romantically and suggesting that Danny may have discovered the relationship and became angry. Now, this gave credence to the theory that Danny and Latrice might have abandoned their apartment early, and the blood they found in the apartment might have belonged to Harmahn. So they needed to speak to Latrice Williams and Danny Deacons. Detectives used employment records from Latrice to locate her through her job. Both she and Danny agreed to come in for interviews, and they were questioned separately. Latrice denied knowing Harmahn. Now, was she lying to cover up for what might have happened at their apartment? But if she says she never knew Harmahn, then how could she be romantically linked to him? And she also had an explanation for the blood stains in her apartment. She claimed that her dog had recently been in a fight with another dog, and the blood belonged to her animal. When they asked Danny about the incident, he also gave the exact same story that Latrice gave. And they claimed to leave the apartment abruptly because, well, they were having a hard time financially. And when Danny's family offered for them to come stay, they quickly latched on to the family for assistance. Now, the lab results finally did come in from the blood taken at their apartment complex, and it revealed that the stains were indeed animal blood, not human. And with no physical evidence connecting them to Harmahn, detectives eliminated Latrice and Danny as suspects, another promising lead that evaporated. Forensics reveal Harmahn's blood was in the trunk of his car, and the case officially shifts from a missing person to a homicide. A month later, a fisherman spotted something floating in a pond. Authorities retrieved the body, which was wrapped in duct tape with a plastic bag over the head, indicating the killer knew the victim. The body was severely decomposed, and they had to use dental records to confirm who the body was. It was Harmahn. Media pressure brought in two key tips. One witness said they saw KB driving a Nissan Maxima the night of the murder. They also saw him wearing a Jesus medallion, Harmahn's signature necklace. They noted that he was with another person, Akeem Keaton. Another witness comes forward, providing KB's location for detectives. Both men were brought in for questioning. KB deflected and said that while he knew Harmahn, he didn't know him like that. And there's a funny joke that says that only Black people use that term, like that. I know him, but not like that. And for my other listeners who are not familiar with the culture, that implies I am aware of his presence. I might have hung around him a couple of times, but I don't know him. KB essentially said, yeah, I hung around him, but I don't really know him. And he knew that he wasn't under arrest. He gathered his belongings and left the interview. They track down Akeem, and Akeem comes down willingly to the police station to talk. And initially, his statement is very much like KB's. Yeah, I know him, but not like that. I don't know what else you want me to say. But a detective stopped him and said, listen, I don't believe your story. You need to give me a little bit more. And Akeem had a pregnant pause, hung his head, and broke. Akeem described the night in detail. He said that KB, Harmahn were all hanging out. That's when they decided ultimately to go back to KB's apartment where they watched a movie and they all fell asleep. Akeem woke up to Harmahn screaming, and KB was over him, jabbing a knife into his body. KB was stabbing so viciously that the knife broke. And that's when KB went and got a frying pan and commenced to hitting Harmahn in the head several times. Akeem was terrified, and KB looked at him and told him to retrieve more knives. Once KB felt that Harmahn was dead, he instructed Akeem to get duct tape, and they wrapped his body. They put plastic bags over his head and secured it with more duct tape. They carried Harmahn's body 3 flights of stairs out of the apartment and placed him in the trunk. KB took his wallet and his medallion, and they drove his body out to the pond where they disposed of it. When asked why, Akeem claimed that KB believed Harmahn stole his credit card. Akeem then told detectives where to find the knives, and they found the knives as well as Harmahn's wallet discarded in a sewer. The evidence led to the arrest of both men. Do you believe fear can ever excuse participation in a violent crime? Or does accountability remain the same regardless of pressure? KB Kirk Brock pled guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 16 to 20 years. Akeem went to trial and was convicted of first-degree murder, robbery, and kidnapping, receiving life in prison. For many observers, the sentencing disparity raised complex questions about plea deals and whether the person with the lesser admitted role received the lighter punishment. For families, justice doesn't always feel equal, even when the system follows its guidelines. Takeaway. Missing person cases hold families hostage between hope and dread. Every phone call could be good news or unbearable loss. When a disappearance becomes a homicide, the pain transforms but does not lessen. Answers come, but peace doesn't always follow. For the Smith family, Harmahn was a son, a brother, a dreamer, a young man raised in love, integrity. His nickname, Hunk of Love, says everything about the energy he brought into the world. And even today, questions linger. Why him? Was the motive truly what Akeem claimed? Did he suffer? Could this have been prevented? Did justice feel complete? There are questions that remain long after the headline fades. Now, do you believe this story about KB, Akeem, and Harmahn at the apartment? For me, it just seems that we're still missing parts of the puzzle. I'm not going to say that it's unusual for teenagers to go back to an apartment. KB seems to be older than Akeem and Harmahn. But the theory that KB believed that Harmahn stole his credit card just doesn't seem to jive for me. I personally believe that KB and Akeem targeted Harmahn. And at some point during their initial hangouts before the murder occurred, they were jealous of Harmahn's car, maybe his Jesus medallion, and felt like he had some money. And so it seems like they both set him up. And I think it's interesting that Akeem was the person to originally confess. It makes me wonder why he did not cop to a plea deal, because I know it was offered for sure, without a doubt. But I think that Akeem believed, at least in his mind, that his role was less significant, that he wasn't the person who killed Harmahn. So let me take this to trial and see if I can shake a better deal. But obviously, that didn't work. I believe that this was a robbery that maybe in their minds wouldn't lead to murder, but perhaps when her mom put up a fight, they decided that it had to end in his death. Either way, this story is extremely disturbing and senseless. Now, as we step out of this case and everything it revealed, we're heading into another story, one just as compelling and just as haunting. So stay with me because our next case takes us down a very different path. But trust me, it's one you need to hear. South Florida is known for sunshine, but there's a version of Florida that doesn't sparkle. It's the Florida of long standing traditions, of mothers and daughters chasing crowns, of small town stages that promise big dreams. But dreams aren't the only things made here. Expectations are made, pressure is made, and sometimes monsters are made here too. But when little girls are taught to smile through pain, to sparkle through insecurity, and to perform perfection on command, eventually something breaks. In today's case, the break wasn't metaphorical, it was deadly. We're talking about a girl who grew up in rhinestones, who learned early how to pose and perfect, and who years later would help detectives locate a grave she buried with her own hands. If you know anything about the pageant world, especially in a place like Florida, then you know it's full of sparkle. The makeup layered onto baby soft skin, lashes longer than childhood should ever have to carry, and enough hairspray to hold a hairstyle through a hurricane. And listen, while pageants can be beautiful, they can also create a world where little girls learn to perform confidence before they've ever built any. A world where appearance becomes currency and perfection becomes a mask. So let's talk about Aria Armstead, a Florida pageant darling, and how a world of glitter slowly turned into something much darker. Aria Armstead was born November 1997 in Fort Myers, raised by her mother, Latasha, and her father. They divorced early in Aria's childhood. She grew up in a home filled with love, but marked by financial strain. Her mother worked a government job and did whatever she could to give her daughter the kind of opportunities she never had. By age 10, Aria was stepping into pageants. She was naturally charming, the kind of child who lit up a room without trying. But in the pageant world, charm is only the beginning. The financial demands, the travel, the outfits, the coaching, those pressures were visible. And children, especially in competitive spaces, notice everything. Aria wasn't as polished as some of the other girls, and kids have a way of cutting each other with small, subtle comments. Those early whispers stay with a child. They sink into the skin long before the foundations and glitter do. Before Arya ever won a crown, she was learning the unspoken rules of this world. Psychologists who study the childhood pageantry often talk about the hidden curriculum. Your worth can be judged, literally. Score sheets, rankings, audience whispers. Perfection is the requirement, not authenticity, not joy, perfection. Smile, even when it hurts, a lesson that can bleed into every part of a child's life. For mothers, pageants can feel like a path upward, scholarship, access, community. For daughters, it can create a divide between who they truly are and who they are trained to be. Now, for you listening, did you ever grow up performing a version of yourself, one that didn't match who you really were? Aria lived that in real time. And later, when her life unraveled, that training and masking emotion would take on a chilling significance. In 2012, Aria entered the Junior Orange Bowl pageant, one of Florida's most prestigious competitions. Unlike many pageants, this one emphasized academics, especially the essay portion, which was Aria's strength. She won. She was crowned queen, Immediately, however, jealousy erupted. Other moms claimed that she didn't live in the correct district. They produced paperwork, they went to the board, they complained that she be stripped of her crown. However, they found out that Aria's father lived within the correct district, and the board deemed her address valid. Aria kept her crown, but with that victory came the weight she didn't expect. People noticed that she looked less joyful, that she carried pressure, the pressure to maintain, to meet expectation, to make her mother proud. And Latasha, she became deeply involved, present at every event, every parade, every opportunity. Some called her a helicopter mom. Others said she loved her daughter fiercely. And as we know with life, both things can be true. After winning Miss Orange Bowl, Aria decided that she would enter the Miss Florida Teen USA circuit. 80 contestants over 4 days of competition, all hoping for 15 finalist spots. Aria struggled. She wasn't as polished as some of the other girls, and she didn't place in the top 15. Not at first. She decided after losing that she would give it another go. So the next year, she did the pageant circuit again and won some prestigious pageants. And she decided to go up the following year for Miss Florida Teen USA in 2014. Now, she knew exactly what to do the second go around. She was polished, she spoke with girls. And although she didn't place in the top 15, she did win Miss Amity, the award for kindness and positivity, a soft irony that pageant insiders remembered years later. Eventually, Aria walked away from pageants, quietly, without ceremony, but she didn't walk into stability. Her relationship with her mother fractured after a heated argument. She cut off contact, dropped out of school, and left the structure she'd grown up in. In the vulnerable space, she met Nathan Ortiz. 3 years later, October 13th, 2017, Francesca files a missing person report for her boyfriend, 31-year-old Matthew Collins. Matthew borrowed her car and never came back. 5 days later, police find the car abandoned in Fort Myers. They noticed that the car had a hole in the front windshield. There was mud and dirt smeared across the exterior, and they found blood along the rim of the trunk. They were able to track Matthew's cell phone data. It pinged near the home of Nathan Ortiz, where Aria was living. Detectives filed for a search warrant for Nathan Ortiz's home. Inside the garage, they found 2 shovels covered in dirt and sand and a wheelbarrow with the same material found in the car Matthew was driving. Aria and Nathan came down for questioning. Aria, the former pageant queen, is calm, composed, eerily steady. She tells detectives that Matthew came over that day. She knew Matthew as Nathan's friend, and they had hung out before. She said that Nathan sat in the front seat along with Matthew, and she sat in the back seat. At this time, Aria said that she was pregnant, and they went to the local Circle K. Now, police already had footage of Matthew going to this Circle K. They knew he was with somebody. They saw him enter the Circle K and leave again, but they were unsure of who this person was. And with Aria telling them of the story of them going to the gas station, they were able to corroborate that it was Nathan in the car as well as Aria inside the car with Matthew. The last people to see Matthew was indeed Aria and Nathan. Aria claims that after going to the gas station, they got back into the car and they were headed back to the neighborhood. On the way back, she claims that Matthew started using a drug called blues, and it made him agitated. He became so agitated that he pulled out a gun and pointed it at Nathan, and he was threatening Nathan. At some point during this altercation or exchange, the gun failed and it dropped in the back seat. Nathan and Matthew get into a physical altercation. Nathan punched him, and out of fear, Aria grabs the gun and fires the gun at Matthew, shooting him. When she shot Matthew, both her and Nathan were stunned. She claims that they are either back at the house or they pull up back to the house, and Nathan gets out of the car, heads back into the home to take a shower. She's left inside of the car trying to figure out what she's going to do. And she decides that she's going to get the shovels that are in the garage, go to the backyard, and start digging because she's going to dig a hole by herself, pregnant, in the backyard. She soon realizes that this probably isn't the best idea, and I'm probably not going to be able to dig this hole by myself. So she calls Nathan outside, and they decide to take Matthew's body to a canal that's about 15 to 20 miles away from their home. Both her and Nathan dispose of the body and go back home. Now, investigators ask her, when you shot him, if it was out of fear and or self-defense, why didn't you call the police? And she said, well, I panicked and I didn't know what else to do. She begins to plead her case, very calmly, I might add. She was describing the events as if she were explaining the weather. And so she says, well, if it weren't for him being agitated and me being in the backseat pregnant, I would have never killed him because, after all, I'm just a pageant girl. I'm just a girl, was her argument. And on October 27th, she led detectives to the grave. Aria was then charged with murder. Nathan Ortiz was charged with accessory after the fact and tampering with physical evidence in connection with the murder. Nathan pled guilty and was sentenced to 42 months in prison, and Aria pled guilty and was sentenced to 40 years. She would not be released until 2037. You remember I said Aria claimed to be pregnant. She claimed that she was pregnant, and this is what led her to shoot Matthew in the first place. She was in fear of her life, fear of her baby's life, fear of her boyfriend's life. But we find out that Aria was not pregnant at all. She lied. Takeaway. When we look back at this case, it's impossible not to pause and sit with the life that was lost. Matthew Eugene Collins. Matthew was a man trying to pull himself toward a better chapter, someone whose past didn't define his desire for change. He had people who loved him, a girlfriend who expected him home, and the simple hope of a fresh start. And that's what makes his death so heartbreaking. He was a human being navigating his own struggles, not a disposable character in someone else's chaos. His life mattered. But this case also forces us to examine the environment that shaped the people accused of taking that life. Aria Armstead grew up in the glitz and glam of Florida pageantry, a world that on the outside looks polished, perfected, and sparkly. But underneath, it can create a dangerous pressure cooker for young girls. The constant emphasis on beauty, competition, and performance can warp identity and self worth, especially for those who never learn how to step outside that persona they're praised for. In Aria's story, you can feel that tension. A young woman conditioned to present perfection while privately spiraling, impulsive, and vulnerable to manipulation. And that brings us to Nathan Ortiz. When you look closely at the details, it becomes hard to believe this was a decision Aria came to alone. Nathan's presence during Matthew's disappearance, his involvement with the car, and his actions afterward raised questions about how much influence he had, how much weight his participation carried in the final outcome. The prosecution certainly believed he played a significant role, and Aria's behavior after the crime suggests a young woman who wasn't operating independently. Instead, she appears entangled with someone who amplified her worst impulses. And then there's the lie. Aria's claim that she was pregnant when she wasn't. Investigators confirmed there was no pregnancy. That detail matters, not because of the lie itself, but because of what it reveals. A person grasping for control, sympathy, or justification amid unimaginable consequences. It reflects instability, desperation, and a disconnect from reality that may have been forming long before Matthew ever crossed her path. When all the pieces come together, Matthew's attempt at rebuilding, Aria's fractured identity shaped by pageant culture, and Nathan's deeper involvement, we're reminded of how layered these tragedies truly are. A single violent act is rarely born in a moment. It's the result of pressure, influences, and decisions that have been building quietly over time. And at the end of it all stands a grieving family, a stolen life, and two young defendants whose choices dismantled multiple futures. Lastly, I want you to know that Nathan was released in October of 2020. Remember, I love when you guys comment and engage in conversation. Let me know what you think about this case. You can do that either on Spotify underneath the comment section, or you can send me a DM or interact with the post that is exclusively about today's episode. I want to encourage you guys to continue to join us over on YouTube as we build our community there. Lastly, we're ending season 8 next week, so make sure you join us for a special episode. If you enjoyed this season or any season of Murder in the Black, please consider leaving us a 5-star review on whatever listening platform you enjoy. Until next time, this is Murder in the Black. I'll see you next week.